This meeting is being recorded.
This is Phil Jansen. Our Chapter 13 discussion question was examine the case San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez, and then discuss the main points of emphasis of the case, research and discuss strategies used by plaintiffs who challenge state funding formulas since the Rodriguez case. So we'll kind of break this up into a few sections, and I think Jack's going to start off by kind of just going over that San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez case.
Yeah, this is Jack Noakes. So basically, in Texas, Mexican American parents filed a class action equity suit on behalf of minority students throughout the state who were basically poor and in disadvantaged school communities. They challenged the low property tax base. So in the district court, they had a 3-judge district court that ruled basically that the finance system in Texas was unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And after that ruling, the state appealed, and it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the ruling by the district's court. I think it was a 5-4 decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a 5-4 decision, that ruling was reversed. They noted in the textbook that although it was reversed, the court did note discrepancies created by the funding system from district to district in Texas. What else I have written down here? So I have written down, in spite of these discrepancies, the court indicated that the Texas funding system did not work to the disadvantage of any class or group because the disadvantages occurred only between districts, regardless of the relative wealth of any family within the districts. So they said that the funding system was not a disadvantage to any specific class or group. Do you guys have anything to throw in there?
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing I took out of it, and as I found in like the subsequent cases that I looked up, is that there's no this is Byron Dacey, by the way. There are no constitutional right to an equal education, just that, you know, those states are in charge of providing, setting up, supporting and monitoring the school systems, the public school systems within their state. So and I also put down that the reserved jurisdiction of and management of their public school finance system goes down to the state. So
yeah, that Supreme Court decision was made in 1973. One of the interesting things I found was this Demetrio Rodriguez, continued to kind of fight the battle, because there's another case in Texas, Edgewood versus Kirby in 1984, where Rodriguez and this organization, MLADEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, they sued William Kirby, who was the commissioner of education in Texas, for maintaining an unfair state public school financing system. So, you know, they were still kind of battling this, you know, 10, 11 years later. And then in June of 1987, Judge Clark of Texas ruled in favor of Rodriguez and Maldef, stating that the school financing system was unconstitutional. Then the decision was appealed by, and then reversed when it went to the district court, and then they appealed it again at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ultimately, you know, reversed the decision, agreeing with the original decision of the trial court. And that decision eventually did lead to some state funding of the poorer districts there in Texas. So that was a landmark case back in the in the early 70s with Rodriguez, but he continued to work with some organizations, especially this MALDEF or MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense, an educational fund to kind of continue to fight that battle. So I just thought that was of note that, they continued to, push for, that funding for those poorer school districts.
And going back to our prompt, we're looking at those strategies that were used in cases after that Rodriguez case in 1973, and I found one in New York. It was the Levittown Union Free School District versus Nyquist, and very much the same thing. The poor school districts or even the smaller school districts were filing suit about the disparity in funds that were coming in based on the formula that was used in primarily being property taxes being the main way of funding those schools. And one thing I found in that case is that the Equal Protection Clause from the 14th Amendment was their big push. And in the New York case, it was both their state and federal constitutions they claimed were being violated based on their finance system. And there's a inequality in per pupil spending, but it was found that it wasn't great enough to jeopardize the constitutional right to an education for those students. So there was no great disparity that was found by the courts. And it's like we've kind of talked about, it all depends on the district. Is it a big district? Is it a small district? The smaller districts, the poor districts, they need more funding, and based on the formulas that have been put together by the state, in this case New York, they don't really take that into account. There was one I read, or Phil, the one from yesterday that you talked about, where the wealthier district had almost $400 more spent per pupil than the poorest district in the state, and it's it combats that that discrepancy. It just continues to make that learning gap wider, and and understand why those lawsuits are happening.
Yeah, and it just seems to be a battle, all over the country, no matter if it's the, smaller school districts to the larger ones, like for instance, here in Nebraska, we have a lot of that, but poor districts to some of the wealthier districts. There's a case, Abbott versus Burke in New Jersey, that started in 1985, and it didn't, I think the last case or the last series of decisions made in that case was in 2011. So just over, 30 years or so, they just had a variety of, decisions made over, funding for schools. And that one in New Jersey, that Abbott versus Burke, was, mostly focused on reaching those poor districts and what they could do to help those poor districts in New Jersey. So it's kind of case by case when you're talking about whether it's a poor and richer school districts or the larger and smaller, but trying to provide that funding for all students.
Mm-hmm. Well, even in that New York case, the Nyquist case, one of their ways of deciding on funding for districts was they put a great significance on student absenteeism, like the number they took your daily, your average daily attendance for your school, and that was also played a part in how much funding you got. So some of those poor districts where they might not have a lot of students showing up because of, having to take care of sick family members, or, you see it where those kids even have to go to work. They drop out because they have to go work for their families to help provide and make money. And so those school districts are losing funding that way too. And the other one was some larger consistencies of pupils with special needs, and getting them the correct funding that for their care and for them to have their free public education, is pretty important as well. There's another case I found similar to Phil's that took over 30 years is the DeRolf versus the state of Ohio. The initial lawsuit began in 1991, and it actually went to the Supreme Court 4 different times. And it finally, the last case was in 2002. And it was really interesting reading this case because the school district basically kept putting off, like the Supreme Court came out and said, hey, your financial situation, how you fund your schools is unconstitutional. You need to make these amendments, and you have 1 calendar year to make it happen. It has to be March 24th of 1998 has to be done. And the school district basically just put it off and put it off. And they kept going back to Supreme Court. Oh, we need an extension. We need this. We're not gonna, oh, we couldn't get this. We need more time. And they just kept delaying and delaying and delaying and delaying. And, they used the local property tax after that first Supreme Court case to help fund their school systems. And, it was amazing that they were able to continue just to put it off. Because you think about it, that first lawsuit in 91, by 2002, the majority of those kids were probably graduated and off to college or working jobs.
One thing I did read on that DeRolf versus state of Ohio case was, after the justice ordered the state government to enact, a constitutional school funding system, it said that this Ohio Supreme Court didn't really provide any guidance for them on, how to do that. So they said, yeah, that could have been one of the reasons why it took so long, is they weren't getting the guidance that they needed from that Supreme Court on maybe how or what it should look like.
Yeah. And a major thing kind of coming from all these is why it's unconstitutional is a lot of these cases they're saying that there has to be a sound basic education provided to the students and provided to the pupils of the entire state, not just certain districts. What that looks like is very open to interpretation, but that's kind of been one of the major pushes in a lot of these cases was there has to be that sound basic education for those students to become citizens that can participate in various things, such as like being on a jury or, being educated enough to be able to go vote in an election. So those were kind of some of the bigger things I've taken out of these cases.
Yeah, and it just seemed like you could find cases from just about anywhere you look. There's no, there was quite a few cases that we just found that we could probably reference many of them. So, just encourage you to kind of look for those specific situations that, maybe you're trying to find that information on, because there's no small number out there of all those cases that we found.
Yeah. There was one in Nebraska I found where they sued back in 2007. They sued then Governor Dave Heineman. It was back in Colfax County. But it was that same thing, the active and productive citizens, and that they would find meaningful employment, qualify for higher education. And actually they decreased the state funding and increased the need for local property taxes to be used in funding those districts. And they complained that they couldn't pay enough to pay new teachers and retain veteran teachers. They didn't have enough money for textbooks or other resources needed to provide that education, upgrading facilities, providing college-bound courses or advanced courses for their higher ability learners. And also the extra funding that needed to go that wasn't accounted for with SPED and ELL students, where the districts were like, where especially the smaller ones in Nebraska, you think some I know, like where my wife's from, she's from Western Nebraska, and there's a lot of meat packing plants out there and stuff like that where the Hispanic population is higher, where they need ELL teachers, but they don't have the funds to really bring them in. So that was just an interesting case where the strategies are similar across the board from one case to the other, and one that happened right here in our backyard. So yeah, similar strategies for probably all these cases, and a lot of them are at least similar in how they were worded, and finding that the funding systems were unconstitutional based on those strategies. So anything else from you guys?
I don't have anything else.
All right.